Have you ever stopped and wondered how a huge corporation can be sued, but you can't go after its CEO personally for the company's debts? Or how a business can literally exist for centuries, outliving every single one of its founders? Well, the answer comes down to one of the most powerful and honestly fascinating legal ideas ever created: the company as a legal person. Today, we're going to break down what that really means and how this single revolutionary concept shapes our entire economy. So let's just kick things off with a simple but pretty deep question. Is a company a person? It might sound a little philosophical, right? But in the eyes of the law, the answer is a huge, resounding yes. And for anyone studying corporate law, getting your head around how and why this is true is the absolute key to unlocking this whole subject. All right, let's get into it. Here's our game plan for today. We're going to start with the basics. What is a company, legally speaking? Then we'll dive right into the game-changing idea of this separate legal entity. From there, we'll explore the kind of superpowers this gives a company, and then the plot twist. We'll look at when courts can actually lift the corporate veil and see who's really pulling the strings. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with this powerful idea of the corporation as both a shield and a sword. Let's do this. Okay, first things first. We all throw around the word company in daily life, and we usually just mean any kind of business. But from a legal point of view, it's something way more specific. A partnership is built on the law of agency. Partners act for each other, they share all the liability. But a company? It's a completely different creature, living on its own separate legal plane. Now, the Companies Act itself is actually pretty simple. It just says a company is something formed and registered under the Act. But legal experts have given us much better descriptions. Chief Justice Marshall once called it an artificial being, invisible, intangible, existing only in contemplation of the law. Pretty cool, huh? But for our purposes, Professor Haney's definition just hits the nail on the head. A company is an artificial person created by law, having a separate entity with a perpetual succession and common seal. The main thing to remember here is that a company isn't just some group of people. It's a legal thing that is deliberately, formally brought into existence by law. Without that registration, it just isn't a company. So this brings us to the absolute bedrock, the foundation of all company law, the principle of the separate legal entity. This is the core idea that a company is a legal person, completely separate and distinct from the people who own it, the shareholders, and the people who run it, the directors. Just think of it like a legal shield standing between the business and its owners. And this idea wasn't just pulled out of thin air. It was cemented in one of the most famous legal cases of all time. Let's jump in a time machine and go back to the late 19th century. I want you to meet Mr. Aaron Solomon. He's a successful leather merchant. His business is booming. But Mr. Solomon, he's got a plan. He sees this new Companies Act as a chance to protect his family and his personal wealth. And what he does next, well, it's going to change corporate law forever. So, what was Solomon's big idea? First, he sets up a new company, calls it Solomon & Co. Ltd. Who were the owners? Well, it's himself and 6 family members who each get one single share. Then this new company buys his successful business from him. In return, the company pays him with cash, some more shares, and now here's the brilliant move, £10,000 in debentures. Now, a debenture is basically a loan, but this one was secured. That means it was guaranteed by the company's assets, which put Mr. Solomon at the very front of the line to get paid back if the company ever got into trouble. So he wasn't just the owner. He was also the company's #1 creditor. Well, as you might have guessed, things didn't go so well. The business hit some hard times and ended up in liquidation. And after the company paid Mr. Solomon back for his secured debentures, there was nothing left for the other unsecured creditors. And they were understandably furious. They argued that the whole company was a fake, a sham, just an alias for Mr. Solomon, and that he should have to pay the company's debts from his own pocket. So who was right? This case went all the way up to the House of Lords, the highest court in the UK, and their decision was an absolute bombshell. Lord MacNaughton delivered the verdict, and his words created the foundation of modern company law. He said the company is, at law, a different person altogether. It didn't matter that Solomon was basically in total control. The company owned the business, and so the company owed the debts, and since Mr. Solomon was a secured creditor, he was legally entitled to be paid first. This decision wasn't just about settling one dispute. It created that legal shield and cemented the principle of separate legal personality for good. So, this legal shield isn't just some little technicality. It gives the company a set of legal superpowers. Let's break down what these key features are, because they all flow directly from that big Solomon decision. Because a company is its own legal person, it gets some pretty amazing features. The most famous one, of course, is limited liability. It also has something called perpetual succession, meaning it can literally live forever. It owns its own property, separately from its owners. Its shares can be bought and sold, and it can sue people and be sued, all in its own name. Let's take a closer look at the big ones. Okay, let's talk about the number one reason people form companies: limited liability. This is the big one. What it means is, if the company goes belly up and owes a ton of money, the shareholders' personal stuff, their house, their car, their savings, are safe. They're off limits. The most they can lose is whatever they invested in their shares. This isn't just some small detail. It is the engine of modern capitalism. It's what allows people to invest in risky startups that could change the world without being terrified of losing everything they own. Without limited liability, there's no way we'd have a Silicon Valley as we know it today. Next up, perpetual succession. And wow, this quote really says it all. Because a company is a separate person, it doesn't die when its owners do. The case this quote comes from is a crazy example. During a war, all the members of a private company were in a meeting and they were all killed by a bomb. So, did the company just cease to exist? The answer was no. The company, as a legal entity, kept on living. The shares simply passed to the legal heirs of the dead members, and they became the new owners. It's wild, and it's why some companies have been around for hundreds of years. They have a life of their own. And that leads perfectly to this idea of separate property. A shareholder doesn't own the company's factory or its computers. They own shares in the company, and that's a totally separate thing. The key case here is Makura v. Northern Assurance Co. So Mr. Makura owned almost all the shares in a timber company. He took out an insurance policy on the company's timber, but he did it in his own name. When all the timber burned down in a fire, the insurance company refused to pay out. Why? Because Mr. Makura didn't technically own the timber. The company did. He had no insurable interest. The company, as the legal owner, should have been the one to get the insurance. So, we've got this incredibly powerful legal shield. But is it unbreakable? What happens when people try to use this artificial person to commit fraud or to get out of their legal duties? Well, the law has an answer for that. It's called lifting the corporate veil. Lifting or piercing the corporate veil is when a court decides to look right through that shield of the company to see who's actually in charge. It's a deliberate choice to ignore the separate legal personality for a moment, to stop it from being abused and to hold the real human beings behind the company accountable for what they've done. It's a crucial but very rare exception to that fundamental rule from Salomon's case. So the big question is, when will a court actually do this? You've got to understand, this isn't something they do on a whim. The courts have huge respect for the Solomon principle because it's so important for business. But there are very specific situations where they've decided that justice demands they find the rule breakers who are trying to hide behind that corporate form. Broadly speaking, these situations fall into two main buckets. First, you've got statutory provisions. This is where a law, like the Companies Act itself, explicitly says that in certain cases, the directors or members are going to be held personally liable. And second, you have judicial interpretations. This is where courts, over many years, have developed principles for when they should pierce the veil to prevent a major injustice. Let's check out a couple of classic examples. A classic reason for a court to step in is to stop fraud or some other kind of improper conduct. Take the case of Guilford Motor Co. v. Horn. So Mr. Horn left his job and he had signed an agreement saying he wouldn't try to poach his old employer's customers. To get around this, what does he do? He sets up a new company with his wife as a director, and that company starts going after the customers. The court saw right through it. They called the company a mere cloak or sham and a device he was using to hide what he was really doing. They pierced the veil and stopped both Mr. Horn and his new company.
Okay, this one is really fascinating. How can a company, an artificial person, be an enemy of the state? Well, during World War I, this exact question came up in the Daimler case. A company was registered in the UK, so technically it was a British legal person. But almost all of its shareholders and all of its directors were German citizens living in Germany. The court decided to lift the veil to figure out its true character. They said that since the people with the real control were in an enemy country, the company itself could be treated as an enemy. Letting it get paid for a debt would be like trading with the enemy during wartime.
Now, it's not just judges who can pierce the corporate veil. The law itself actually has exceptions to the legal shield built right in. We call these statutory grounds. For example, if a company's prospectus, that's the document used to get investors, has false information in it, the directors can be held personally responsible for any money people lose. Or if a company fails to get enough subscribers for its shares, the directors are personally on the hook to return all the application money with interest. It can even be something as simple as a typo. If an officer signs a check but gets the company's official name slightly wrong, they can be held personally liable for that amount. These laws are all there to make sure people are held accountable. So after going through the fundamental rule and all its critical exceptions, we end up with this really powerful metaphor that just perfectly sums up the two-sided nature of the corporation in the eyes of the law. And here it is, the key takeaway. The principle of the separate legal entity is a shield. It's there to protect investors, to encourage people to take risks, and to allow businesses to grow in a way that drives our whole economy. It is absolutely essential. But the law, through this idea of lifting the corporate veil, makes sure that this protective shield can't be turned into a sword, a weapon to be used to commit fraud, to dodge legal responsibilities, or to create injustice. And that really leaves us with this final, important question to think about. The line between using a company for legitimate protection and abusing it for an improper purpose, well, that line can be incredibly thin. The constant challenge for our courts and our lawmakers is to keep that delicate balance, to protect the corporate shield that makes business possible while always being ready to pierce right through it whenever it's being used as a sword.